Hi, I'm Sid, co-founder, CEO at GitLab, and I'm in a call with Darren Murph, our all-remote evangelist, and Ben Halpern from Dev.to, big developer community. And we're going to talk about remote work. Ben, do you want to introduce yourself and kick us off with the first question?
I'm Ben. I founded our company a few years ago, and I felt like reaching out because we have a lot of similarities, and we sort of look up to GitLab in a lot of ways. We're trying to do everything distributed, commercial, open source. I think so we try to model ourselves after you also. I think it's great to have a conversation. And the first question is that you have a lot of radically open ways of operating. Can you name a few of the most sort of impactful transparency policies or ways you do things in that way?
Yeah, thanks. So thanks for the compliment. And I think you're doing a great job building a community that isn't easy. And Dev.to is one of the most biggest one we see out there. So well done. And thanks for doing this call with me. Most impactful one definitely has been our handbook. It's allowed us to scale. It's allowed people to join the company, not having to ask a lot of questions to others. What people universally report is like, if I ask questions at GitLab, people are so helpful. And then I should start asking like, okay, how many questions did you ask compared to your last job? Because it's probably a lot less. People are not as tired of questions here because a lot of it was written down. And the other big impact has been hiring. Like the handbook allows people to see how we operate. And if they like it, they can opt into that. So that's been an enormous benefit.
How do you build out the handbook? Like, how do you make changes? What's the process like that?
Yeah, so it's a static website and people propose merge requests, propose a change, allow people to comment, and then merge that after a while. Most of the time, it can be the same person, but it's also very common that someone assigns this to their manager to merge into the handbook.
Cool. So does this kind of, does the habit of maintaining the handbook sort of relate to general documentation? Like how is the documentation for the handbook kind of handled versus like technical documentation and other sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's the same process. So our documentation was also in a repo. It's not a static, it's a static website. So works in exactly the same way.
Cool. So is it like a lot of the same sort of people involved in that, or is it like the same general guideline and culture and practice for culture handbook stuff versus technical stuff? Is that kind of?
Yeah, it is a different style guide, although in the handbook style guide, we refer to the doc style guide. It's a completely different team. For documentation, it's written by developers, and then there's a documentation team that kind of refactors it and does all the other things. For the handbook, it's written by leadership and basically everyone in the company. And then there's only a single person, Brian Sexton, who's doing work on like refactoring it and fixing broken things. Although we might intensify that a bit, but different people, different purposes, different repos.
Cool. What are the sort of big lessons in general in terms of building out the distributed asynchronous team, like workflow, like what do you do in chat versus issues or anything else? Like,
yeah, lots of lessons. I think a few things I want to highlight. Like, it's very counterintuitive to work handbook first. So we discovered you have to be handbook first. Like documenting stuff after the fact is not going to happen. People have busy lives. So if you make a change, it should be changed in the handbook. That is the way you communicate a change. If it's not changed in the handbook, it's not changed. You cannot ask anybody to do something that's not in the handbook. That's hard. Enforcing that is a big part of my life. So trying to find different ways to enforce that, but it's certainly not something that happens organically. And that's what you see at every other company, that the handbook becomes stale because people start doing other things to communicate changes. I think as for working asynchronously, our top three values help there. Those are results, transparency, and iteration. Results means that we look at people's output, so we don't expect to be online at the same time. We just look at the work you produced. Transparency helps because you don't have to like ask for access to stuff. Most of the stuff is open, either to the public or within the company. And iteration means scoping things down to the smallest possible thing, and then shipping that really quickly. And that helps because if you take small steps, you don't need to coordinate with as many people because it's a small step. If you're off in the wrong direction, you can correct on the next step. Well, if you're going to do a 9-month plan, then you better coordinate with everyone. So less coordination really helps with working asynchronously.
Cool. What about like a company like hangout time? Do you do anything like just like non-work communication in any explicit way?
We do, but we use our regular tools to do the non-work communication. So I think it's really important if you're remote that you're intentional about informal communication. And we have different ways in which we stimulate that. We do a group conversation every day where it's still about work. It's a certain department that has a presentation, but instead of presenting it, it's just Q&A for 25 minutes. We do breakout calls where you sit with a group of people. You get a question to talk about. Today, the question was, at a party, would you rather be smart or funny? And the consensus was funny, definitely. And we talked about the new Joker movie and everything else. It's just hanging out for 20 minutes. We also encourage people to do coffee chats. So I had one yesterday, new team member, you can plan a coffee chat with anybody, a coffee call, including with me. And we make people do 10 of those so that they get used to the fact that you don't need an agenda. You can just send anybody a calendar invite to plan 25 minutes to just hang out together. Maybe talk about work, maybe not talk about work. It's all fine. It's the kind of a water cooler conversation. And the last thing I want to highlight is the team social, where you hang out with your direct team for like 50 minutes every week on a fixed point in time. And it's just because in remote, you're so efficient that there's not a lot of like time waiting for the meeting to start and things like that. So you have to create that space. We save a lot of time by not commuting. We also save a lot of time by not waiting for the meeting to start because we start on time and we explicitly mark some time off for the informal interaction.
Cool. Yeah, this is all helpful. This is all, we're padding down, we're up to 12 people now, but we're planning for, growth and it's useful to hear about all this. So you're built on Rails. You're an important open source company built on like an important open source project. How has your relationship with the framework itself and like the other open source components of your company evolved over time? Like, is it more of a relationship as you grow, or any more involvement with the open source software that influences your software?
So I think we're mainly a consumer of Rails. We've not contributed back a lot, but we have contributed back here and there, mostly like bug fixes and things like that. We love Ruby on Rails because it allows us to go really, really fast. A lot of complex business logic. Ruby is a great language to implement and test that in. But by no means it's Rails only. We're, for example, hiring for Go engineers. And if you look at the GitLab architecture, there's lots of different components to it. There's a lot of other open source, Grafana, Prometheus, but there's also stuff we spun out ourselves, like Gitly, GitLayer. But trying to use open source and trying to use the right language, like everything that's needs a lot of performance and multi-threading, we tend to write in Go, like GitLab Workhorse and things like that. But our Rails app has most of like the complex functionality It's not super performance sensitive. It's just a matter of managing all that complexity. And that's been amazing. And we continue to be able to go really, really fast in our development.
Cool. Yeah, that kind of looks like, possibly a view into our future as we, as our complexity naturally evolves and we just have to do new things. And so, yeah, it's always kind of cool to check out what you are up to, because it kind of maps it well to our goals and what we want to do. Do you have any advice for us? So where we are in our business right now, we manage our one core instance of our code base, but we do want to generalize and evolve our offering in terms of commercial open source and let other folks spin up their own sort of segmented community on our software. So, for example, like a community.gitlab.com to the sort of self-contained, self-owned developer community stuff. Yeah, just like open-ended, like we're sort of like just beginning to embark in that phase. Any high-level advice as we start to think about this in terms of how it plays with our business, our open source strategy, anything, et cetera?
Yeah, I think if you're going to do open source, you're going to have a lower take rate. So you're going to capture less of the value that you create compared to proprietary software. So make sure that there's a giant market to serve.
Yeah.
I'm sure you already considered this, but I'm going to call it out anyway. Have a talk with the people from Stack Overflow and from Discourse. They should have a lot of relevant experience. I think building communities in companies is hard, and companies are reluctant to pay for that.
Yeah.
I do think that there's a huge skill gap in most companies where it's not clear what skills people have. It's hard to up-level them. And that's where you do an amazing job on the internet with all the great content you produce. So being able to see in a company who knows something about what, and who's doing a good job being a mentor, and who's more senior, and what kind of expertise they have. I think that's something companies are willing to pay for. The last thing is like pricing. Be careful about what you price for, so that there's, on one hand, organic adoption by the individual contributors, and on the other hand, compelling features for like executives to pay for.
Cool. Yeah. That all makes sense. I think we're trying to let the market pull us in the right direction, and we're still like a little bit out from being locked in too much. So it's really nice to hear that, or I don't know, any signal we can get, I think at this point is helpful in mapping that out as we navigate it.
So what it took us a while is to like, what do we have people pay for, like consultancy and support and stuff like that? And the problem is it's too low margin. It's not going to work. So have them, I think, paying for features is a natural business model with software. What features to charge for, and we settled on buyer-based open core, where like, who cares the most about having this feature? And if it's an individual contributor, it's open source. And then as they get higher up the hierarchy in the company, it becomes more expensive, and everyone pays that price. so everyone's on the same plan or tier. If you Google buyer-based open core, you'll find some presentations. There's a few more aspects to it, but that took us like 2-3 years to figure out. We tried to charge on sophistication of the customer, the size of the customer, all these things, and all of that didn't work.
Cool. Yeah, I don't really have any more specific questions.
Cool.
So,
well, thank you so much for the call.
Yeah. Great to meet you. Great to have you on the call too, Darren. And awesome. Hope to run into you at a conference or something someday.
Same here.